I'm assuming you guys know what Mars is, because otherwise y'all want to be here. So that awkward introduction is now out of the question. However, Olympus Mons, not all y'all may not know what that is, so conveniently I have slides. For those of you who are from Arizona State University, I am so sorry, but your institution and your entire state is being covered by Olympus Mons. You might want to call somebody about that. But anyways, it is the largest known volcano in our entire solar system. To compare, the largest volcano on Earth is Mauna Loa. It is, like Olympus Mons, a shield volcano, and it is 10 kilometers, or 6.3 miles high, and 120 kilometers, or 75 miles across. A little small in comparison to this thing. The volume of Olympus Mons is about 100 times larger than that of Mauna Loa. In fact, the entire Hawaiian island chain could fit inside this ginormous shield volcano. And figures 1 and 2 show a very inopportune moment that NASA had. They could have called it 2001 a Mars Odyssey, and they didn't. I mean, it was right there, NASA. Anyways, so this was the spacecraft that was launched that carried Themis. It contains 5 visible bands and 9 infrared bands. I focus on the infrared bands because it's infinitely better for mineral analysis. All right, so my methodology. I obtained 4 northern aspect and southern aspect slope images from Arizona State University's Themis Images data website. After converting them to an NV, for those of you who do not know remote sensing, it's a remote sensing software program that pretty much reads all these related, reads all the remote sensing related imagery. After bringing it into NV, there was a couple of things that I did before I even did any analysis. First and foremost, I examined it for noise using a technique called MNF, or minimum noise fraction transformation. Essentially what that does is I loaded the 9 bands individually using this tool and identified if there are any noise in the data that could potentially be pose problematic. It passed, and then I moved on to the atmospheric correction, which corrects for the dust that Mars, and particularly on top of Olympus Mons, would experience. And then after doing that, I ran another MNF to make sure that if there was any potentially problematic noise in those images, that they were eradicated, so my data would be hopefully as accurate as possible. Also from ASU, I obtained a spectral library, which contains 170 minerals. And then I sampled that to Themis's infrared bands of varying wavelengths in micrometers. So the spectral angle mapper, it's a physically based supervised classification that matches pixels to a spectra. So in this instance, it was the mineral library that I brought in. JMARS is the Java Mission Planning and Analysis for Remote Sensing, which is ASU's GIS tool. If you know anything about ArcGIS, it's very similar to ArcGIS in terms of like the format and how it looks. There serves as a ground check for mineral analysis via TESS, and TESS is the thermal emission spectrometer. All right, so this shows the 4 images that I used for Olympus Mons. The rest of the information outside of the eye is irrelevant. It's just a basic image identifier. The eye is the more important one. It shows that they're infrared. And I tried to get images that were either on top of or as close to as possible around the same time, all during day, and that were clear enough and without much of any built-in noise due to the way that the images were collected in case Themis had a bad hair day that day or something like that. All right, so the results. Over the next couple of slides, I'll be showing, they're pretty much identical, but they feature a table, and then this image right here on all of them is the infrared imagery after doing the 2 MNF and as well as the atmospheric correction, and also doing a technique called destriping, which, as the name implies, removes stripes in the data, which could potentially hold bad data. For purposes of the way these are oriented, everything is facing this way. So this is north. This is the second SAM, or spectral angle mapper classification. And then all of these colors correspond to the ones that were selected for being the most prevalent using the cursor located tool in ENVI. So this is for the first image, that was north-facing slope. And then its counterpart, the south-facing slope. And the thing that's really interesting to note about this is like how a lot of these geological features just light up like crazy during the spectral angle mapper tools too, like particularly this part right here amongst these colors. And then another northern aspect one, again, same thing, like it's really interesting to note the geological features that like this part completely just doesn't show up at all in the SAM, but the rest of it is pretty noteworthy. And then this one was an image that was potentially problematic, but I included it, if only for this part right here. I found it really interesting that the magenta mineral and the blue mineral were like kind of right on top of each other during this entire time. All right, so the next two tables shows the literature validation on Mars, both the northern aspect and the southern aspect. There's a couple of ones that are very noteworthy to mention. First and foremost is ilmenite. It was found to be the most prevalent mineral on the northern aspect, which is interesting to note because of what this research group found, that this mineral could potentially serve as a food source for iron oxidizing, iron scavenging bacteria, which is cool because Mars is obviously covered in iron. Now mind you, of course, I'm not trying to make assumptions, but this study was obviously done on Earth and not in Mars. And even though it was done in Mars-like environments, with it being in a mostly oxygen-deprived environment, it's still very interesting to note. The other two minerals I want to highlight on this particular slide is calcite and quartz. So calcite, the two research studies that I mentioned on here, one of them found that the rapid increase of the crystalline structure developed under biotic conditions makes these calcite minerals less resistant to thermal treatments compared with the samples of abiotic origin. Therefore, the infrared spectroscopy is a valid technique to discern the origin of the samples and a powerful tool for analyzing in situ and sample return Mars mission specimens, and that was from Blanco. The latter one, their results of their research show that it is encouraging for a possible preservation of mineral biotic calcite structures on Mars for billions of years. Furthermore, they suggest that the future Mars landers be equipped with instruments to both heat and weigh minerals to determine whether they have been supported by life. Oh, in case you're not familiar with what chrism is, it's like Themis, but I noticed it was out of scope. I didn't want to include it because I didn't want to include way too much data. So for the purposes of the study, chrism was out of scope for my study, but the acronym is Compact Reconnaissance Image Spectrometer for Mars. And the reason why Opportunity used it is because Opportunity had an unfortunate circumstance where Opportunity wasn't able to, like Curiosity, able to actually use his own spectrometer. So it had chrism data had assisted a little bit. So finally with quartz, Themis scientists, so those who actually created and helped run this instrument, discovered quartz and realized that quartz on Mars didn't likely come about the same origin as quartz on Earth due to the fact that there's really not that many plate tectonics, or if any plate tectonics on Mars, as far as we know. So they propose that it may have formed when thick sequences of basaltic rocks were metamorphosized by moderate heat and pressure and then partially melted. That's interesting because this was discovered, I noticed this mineral on a volcano. So that might help with the validation attempt with that. Furthermore, the scientists mentioned that the granite-like rocks are rare in the Martian surface and say that this process that formed them has not been widespread. All right, and then for the southern aspect, The most prevalent minerals that were discovered on this particular portion are halloysite, melanite, and banadinite. What's interesting to note about banadinite is that, as I mentioned, as it mentions in the slide, there hasn't been any documented research to show that it has or has not ever been confirmed on Mars, but because banadinite is the result of oxidation of lead and is found in sedimentary rocks, and given Mars is made up of lead and also of sedimentary rocks, it seems likely that this mineral is on Mars. Another interesting thing to note about this mineral is that a simple superoxide is at work on Mars. In this particular scenario, a combination of UV and superoxides would essentially sterilize the Martian surface, stripping it of all of its organic precursors to life. They are quoted to say, "The oxygen radicals can explain the reactive nature of the soil and the apparent absence of the organic material at the Martian surface." All right, so conclusions. It should be noted that this study was a pilot study. While there were other research groups that looked at other places on Mars, as was mentioned in previous slides, they never focused on Olympus Mons. So I used the techniques I mentioned in previous slides were done based upon what previous researchers have done, what my own intuition told me, and because it was a pilot study, I figured it was interesting to just kind of like go down a rabbit hole, but not go down all the way. So that's first and foremost with the conclusions. Secondly, I found some interesting results with respect to ilmenite and vanadinite and the other ones that I mentioned that were most prevalent on the northern and southern aspect of Olympus Mons, that they're clearly very different, which might eventually show that maybe they're different in terms of how they formed. Furthermore, the infrared bands of Themis their spatial resolution are 100 meters. So because of that, their pixels obviously contains likely a lot more minerals than my research actually showed. However, even though I selected the ones that were the most prevalent, it should be noted that without very intense spatial resolution, it's likely a little difficult to actually legitimately ground truth everything. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, questions for Nicole?
So you pulled out a few specific minerals that you discussed and kind of what those could mean.
Mm-hmm.
But looking at this mineral assemblage as a whole, kind of like what you saw all together, kind of integrating everything, all these different minerals, the fact that they're, all on Olympus Mons, what do you think that means for the geologic history of Olympus Mons?
Honestly, I think, it's definitely very, very rich. A lot of them that I found were pyroxene-based, which has been documented to show that there's quite a lot of them that are related to that major group of minerals. But I mean, because this is just the first, study that was done, I'm hoping in the future I'll be able to do a different iteration of this and maybe do a different techniques to see if A, I can replicate this, and B, to sample other minerals just to see where they're at.
Very interesting talk.
Thank you.
I found it quite surprising the abundance of phyllosilicates and carbonates that you found on the slopes. Those are minerals that typically are formed in the presence of water. So I'm just curious what you thought about finding those on the slopes of the biggest volcano in the solar system.
Yeah, I was the same way. I was like, calcite, really? What? So that's why I wanted to make sure that that's part of the reason why I wanted to validate everything. So that's why when I found those two studies, I guess in my mind, it definitely seems that it could potentially, it's again a very big stretch that the biotic calcite samples, if they do indeed exist on Olympus Mons, obviously it's impossible to literally go there because Curiosity can't make it up there. We can't make it up there when we do get to Mars, but it definitely merits very interesting.
One more quick question.
I also really liked your calcite results on spawns. I was wondering, do you find them associated any sort of variation of calcite with iron in the matrix?
Well, with respect to like, did I find it like on top of it or?
Manganese or iron?
Oh, well, I mean, there's a,
Actually in the calcite.
the way this the way this mineral library works is it doesn't show like anything like in it. It just shows like it ranks it by purity. So it's very likely that if some of them are impure, they could have been like cross-contaminated with another sample. But unfortunately, the mineral library that I did doesn't look into to see if it's like calcite in the presence of X or Y or anything like that, unfortunately.
All right, we have to move on. So thanks, Nicole, again.